The system flagged the contact at 2:17 local time. Not because it was hostile, not because it crossed a border, but because it didn't behave like anything the system had seen before. The track appeared at the edge of monitored airspace, clean, stable, and technically compliant. Its speed was legal, its altitude unremarkable. Its transponder was present, but incomplete in a way that didn't trigger alarms outright. For several seconds, it looked like nothing. Then the correlation layer failed. The primary radar held the return, but secondary confirmation lagged by just enough to matter. The system tried to reconcile the data, position, velocity, identification, and couldn't collapse it into a single trusted track. Instead, confidence values began to decay. Inside the operations center, no one reacted at first. This wasn't a scramble alert. It wasn't a declared incursion. No warning tone sounded. No automated intercept logic fired. But one line on the display changed color. The system wasn't asking what the contact was. It was asking whether it should still trust its own assumptions. A technician leaned closer to the screen. The contact wasn't accelerating. It wasn't maneuvering aggressively. It wasn't doing anything that doctrine defined as threatening. And yet, every predictive model attached to the track had stopped converging. The system issued a flag. Not a command, not an alert, but a recommendation. Monitor. Escalate awareness. Start the clock. From the outside, nothing had happened. No aircraft diverted, no radar sweeps intensified. Civil traffic continued to flow. The sky looked exactly the same as it had a minute earlier. Inside the system, however, a threshold had been crossed. This wasn't about interception. It wasn't about intent. It was about the moment a military detection network quietly acknowledged that something inside its coverage no longer fit the rules it was built on. And once that realization occurs, procedure replaces certainty. Because from that point forward, the risk is no longer the contact itself. The risk is what happens if the system is wrong. Once the flag was set, the system did what it was designed to do next. It widened the lens. The track was pulled out of isolation and placed against everything else moving in the region. Civilian flight paths, military training corridors, known transit lanes, weather returns, electronic noise, historical behavior patterns from previous days and weeks. Nothing matched. The contact wasn't violating airspace, but it was skirting the outer logic of how compliant traffic usually behaved. Its routing showed intent without declaring purpose. Its timing aligned with nothing scheduled. And its data signature, technically present, yet operationally thin, created a gap that automation could not resolve on its own. That gap mattered. In systems like this, escalation doesn't begin with alarms. It begins with handoffs. The track was promoted from automated monitoring to human review. A controller didn't take over, at least not yet, but a second set of eyes was assigned. Then a third. The system began requesting confirmations it normally trusted itself to make. Each request added seconds. Each second added uncertainty. The confidence score continued to slide, not sharply, but steadily. The kind of degradation that doesn't justify action, yet quietly invalidates assumptions. The contact still wasn't hostile, still legal, still inside every published rule. But escalation isn't triggered by what is happening. It's triggered by what can no longer be ruled out. Adjacent sensors were tasked without announcement. Passive systems were asked to listen rather than illuminate. Data was pulled from neighboring sectors, not because the contact crossed into them, but because context sometimes reveals intent faster than proximity. Nothing lit up, which made the situation worse. In the operations center, posture began to change. Not visibly. No raised voices, no urgent movement, just fewer casual conversations. Chairs angled closer to consoles. A subtle shift from observation to readiness. The system issued another recommendation, slightly stronger this time. Increase resolution. Prepare downstream coordination. That line carried weight. Downstream coordination meant this was no longer a single node problem. It meant that if the track continued, other commands might need to see it, not to act, but to be aware. And awareness creates responsibility. Still, no intercept was ordered. No aircraft were launched. No public signals were sent. But escalation had already begun. Because when a military system stops trusting its models, it doesn't wait for certainty. It buys time. And buying time, in these moments, is itself a form of action. The first deliberate action wasn't movement, it was authorization. A supervisor keyed in and acknowledged the track at a higher clearance level. Not to assume control, but to remove friction. From that moment, requests no longer needed secondary approval. The system could ask harder questions faster. Sensor tasking shifted. Active radar remained unchanged, deliberately so. Painting the contact harder would only signal interest, and interest at this stage was information the system wasn't ready to give away. Instead, passive arrays were leaned on. Frequency space was sampled more aggressively. Background noise was stripped away in narrower bands. The contact stayed quiet. No emissions, no deviations, no response to anything it couldn't plausibly ignore. That, too, was a data point. The system projected the track forward, not minutes, but decision windows. If the contact maintained course and speed, it would pass through the monitored area without ever forcing a line crossing event. No violation, no intercept justification, no clean trigger. Which meant that if this was intentional, it was designed to test restraint rather than provoke reaction. That possibility changed the math. A coordination message was drafted. Not sent yet, just prepared. Language mattered. This wasn't a warning. It wasn't a request. It was a heads up, written to survive scrutiny if it ever had to be explained later. Uncorrelated track. Legally compliant. Confidence decay ongoing. Monitoring under elevated posture. Nothing in that message accused the contact of anything. Everything in it acknowledged uncertainty. The system ran contingency branches in parallel. If the contact altered course by even a few degrees, certain thresholds would trip. If it changed altitude abruptly, others would follow. If it went silent entirely, the rules changed again. None of those things happened. Minutes passed. In that time, the system made its most important move. It did nothing irreversible. No interceptors were scrambled. No alerts were issued to civilian authorities. No external signals were leaked. Every action taken could be walked back. Every decision preserved optionality. That restraint wasn't passive, it was calculated. Because in modern military systems, action isn't defined by motion, it's defined by commitment. And commitment, once made, narrows futures. The contact continued on its path, still unremarkable to anyone not watching the right screen. But inside the system, every variable that mattered was already live. The clock was running. The contact exited the monitored sector without incident. No airspace violation. No maneuver that forced escalation. No moment that could be pointed to as the justification for action. From the outside, the event resolved itself quietly, exactly the way non-events are supposed to. Inside the system, it did not close that way. As the track faded beyond sensor priority, confidence values stopped decaying, but they didn't recover either. The system marked the encounter as unresolved, a classification reserved for cases where behavior complies with rules but undermines assumptions. That designation carried consequences. The data package was frozen and archived at a higher retention level. Not because it proved anything, but because it failed to disprove too much. The track's signature, timing, routing, correlation gaps, was added to pattern libraries used to train future detection logic. In effect, the system admitted that it had been surprised. A post-event review was initiated, not as an investigation, but as a calibration exercise. Analysts replayed the sequence frame by frame, looking for the moment where certainty quietly slipped away. They didn't find a single error. What they found was worse. Every component had behaved correctly. Every rule had been followed. Every decision had been defensible. And yet, the system still couldn't say what it had seen. That ambiguity forced a re-evaluation, not of tactics, but of confidence. If a legally compliant contact could pass through the architecture while degrading predictive trust, then deterrence was no longer just about boundaries and responses. It was about signaling awareness without revealing limits. No public statement was issued. No briefing acknowledged the event directly. To do so would have elevated it, transforming ambiguity into narrative, and narratives invite repetition. Instead, subtle changes followed. Monitoring thresholds were adjusted, not lowered, but diversified. Correlation logic was given more weight relative to single sensor certainty. Review pathways were streamlined so that human judgment could enter earlier without triggering visible escalation. None of those changes were reactions to a threat. They were reactions to a realization that the system had done exactly what it was built to do, and still encountered something it couldn't fully classify. And that meant the next time might not be so quiet. Events like this don't rewrite doctrine overnight. They do something more subtle. They expose where doctrine stops being explicit and starts relying on assumption. For decades, military detection systems were built around violations. Cross a line, break a rule, trigger a response. The logic was clean because the world it assumed was clean. Hostile intent revealed itself through non-compliance. That assumption no longer holds. What this encounter reinforced wasn't the need for faster reactions or sharper intercepts. It was the importance of managing ambiguity as a strategic condition. When a contact can remain legal while still degrading trust, the system is forced to operate in a gray space where restraint becomes a signal in itself. Modern doctrine now treats confidence decay as meaningful as boundary crossing. Not because decay proves intent, but because it compresses decision time without announcing escalation. Systems are designed to surface uncertainty early, allowing commanders to shape outcomes before options disappear. That shift changes what action looks like. Action becomes preparation without exposure, coordination without declaration, readiness without commitment. The goal isn't to force a response from the contact. It's to deny the contact insight into how close it came to one. Because once an adversary understands where your certainty breaks down, they don't need to violate your rules. They only need to operate just inside them. The doctrine that emerges from encounters like this doesn't promise control. It prioritizes resilience. It accepts that some tracks will never be resolved in real time, and that the system's strength lies in how it adapts afterward, quietly, without spectacle. The most important outcome of that night wasn't the contact itself. It was the recognition that deterrence now begins long before a warning is ever issued, and often ends without one being needed at all. And that is why the system flagged the threat before anyone knew what it was. Because in modern defense, the first battle is no longer over territory. It's over certainty. The contact never forced a response. It never crossed a line. It never revealed intent. But it changed the system anyway, because the most consequential threats are no longer the ones that demand action. They're the ones that quietly teach a military system where its certainty ends, and start shaping what it does the next time that happens.